welcome everybody. Thank you so much for making it today to what's turned into a very intimate seminar. We'll give you personalized attention. I think everybody knows me, my team is coming in here. Big shout out to them for helping set all of this up. We've got our wonderful speakers, Jeff Hartley of RBC
Hello.
Dominion Securities, Vasco Kachowski from Lax Kachowski, Barristers and Solicitors, and Teresa Kazowski. So we have a Kashansky, a Kachowski, and a Kazowski all in the same room. Just in case, yeah, just in case. K's and skis, right? So we hope that today will be informative for you. Obviously, we're sort of casual, informal. Feel free to ask questions that will help you with your planning. So before we get Jeff Hartley up here, I did also want to give a big thank you to Grant Hooper and Chartwell for providing this fantastic facility and the incredible spread. I certainly will be enjoying that after the seminar. Glad you all had a chance to do that. So Grant, just a couple of minutes, I'll give you the floor just to give a little introduction.
Yeah, so welcome to the sumac, everyone. We like to keep things pretty lighthearted here, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I'm pretty sure you can get a feel for the room just being here. It's a little different type of a retirement community. So if you are interested in learning more, I will be offering tours following the event in our model suite. So I'm here if you have any questions, and I will hand it back over to Irene. But thank you for hosting today.
Thank you, Grant.
Thank you.
All right, Jeff, we'll give you
Over
the floor.
here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds good. Let me grab my multiple beverages here.
Multiple beverages.
I'll maybe do a close after this. All right, how are you? Might as well, I'll ask names. What are your names?
Flavia.
Flavia?
I'm Lawrence.
Lawrence?
I'm Jan.
Ayan?
Jerry.
Hi, Jerry?
Utah.
Okay, sorry.
Utah.
Okay. So I'm Jeff Hartley. I'm going to switch gears on what I kind of plan to do because this is a smaller group, which is I actually think is a good thing. So I'm a senior portfolio manager and wealth advisor at RBC Dominion Securities. You have to bear with me, my allergies have been bad this week. And what we do is help families and businesses with a lot of decisions around their investing, their financial planning, what does their will and estate planning look like, should I buy a house, should I pay my debt down, should I put money towards investments, should I downsize, all these types of decisions, and then obviously work with other partners like the other people that are going to be speaking today as well as Irene. A bit about my background. I used to work at Ernst & Young in their tax group for about 11 years and then joined RBC Dominion Securities in 2011. I live 10 minutes from here in Leslieville. 5-year-old son who was very disappointed with the rain this morning because he didn't get to play ball hockey. Me just as disappointed because I was looking forward to playing ball hockey. Yeah, we've been in the neighborhood since 2007. So 4 kind of main discussion points I was going to cover today, but like I said, I think given the size of the group, if there's anything that you want to ask or you think might be top of mind, maybe actually I'll ask that first. Is there anything that you knowing my background and knowing my role, that you said I would like Jeff for you to cover this? Is there anything that kind of comes to mind?
No, right now.
No,
I got one.
Okay, go for it. Jan, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Jan, RSPs. Can you declare a beneficiary that is not your spouse and not a dependent child?
Yes.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. It won't necessarily roll over if you were to pass away. It wouldn't roll over tax effectively because it has to be a spouse to roll over tax free. So if it's a child or if it's somebody else, then it's going to get taxed on your final tax return when you pass away.
Okay. All right, and then actually further to that, real quick to close that out, my oldest daughter is severely diabetic.
Okay.
And has been,
My wife's type 1.
and has, received the disability tax credit from the government.
So
Does
yeah.
that make her a dependent child?
I don't believe so, but I don't know about that one for sure. Do you have an accountant? They would be the one that'd be able to answer that one for sure. I can look into
Yeah,
that. If I
actually,
read-
I do have my mom's account, and I'll ask you.
Yeah, that's a tax, that'd
That's
be
a
more an
tax,
accounting
that's
question.
a tax law
Yep.
thing, yeah.
Yep, I'm gonna guess the answer is probably no. But because, again, my wife qualifies for the disability tax credit as well with type 1 diabetes, there may be an argument there.
Okay, thank you.
Any other pressing questions or anything you want me to address? Yep,
I was sort of interested in the financial aspect of preparing for retirement.
yep,
You know, what do I need to know before I retire? How much money do I need? What sort of healthcare aspects
yep,
in the long term? Or
yep.
things like
Okay,
that.
so I'll cover a bit about the retirement planning piece and what I'm
Yeah.
talking about, and then we might have a discussion offline about your specific situation. Okay? So 4 main sort of discussion points. I'll spend more time on the first 2 than the last 2. The first one is, given this crazy world that we live in, whether you're downsizing or not, whether you're thinking about buying a house or not, what are the ways that you can protect your financial assets in a world that's gone through COVID, a war, inflation, crazy interest rate hikes last year, the fastest rate hikes in the better part of 40 years. What can you do to make sure, other than putting your money under the mattress or in a pillowcase, what can you do to protect your assets? And in my mind, there are a number of things that have changed in 2023 and 22 that allow you to do that actually has not existed in the better part of the last decade. Interest rates going up is generally a bad thing for debt, but it's a good thing on the investment side, long term, because it means that you can go out and buy a GIC. A 1-year GIC now pays 4.5%. A Canadian government bond, a US Treasury in the United States, you can get 4 to 5%. Those types of investments only 16 months ago, 17 months
they're
ago,
paying
were
nothing.
paying 1, right? So that's important. And then secondly, we've seen this. I'm sure you see it with your grocery bills, right? Inflation. I mean, that's the one that people seem to be noticing the most. I notice it with avocados for some reason.
Yeah.
You're seeing inflation at a feverish pace, and yes, it's starting to tone down a little bit, but it's still high, and most people have seen their expenses in a lot of different categories go up. And in the same time, the stock market last year went down, right? So expenses going up, my investments have lost money. What do I do here? Well, one of the biggest things, again, as a result of what's happened last year, is that there's a lot of high quality, I'm going to use Bell Canada, TELUS, Enbridge as sort of big type of company names. Well, they pay 5 and 6% levels of dividend income. And to me, that's a very interesting investment that is a very high quality and more of a defensive type of investment in this environment. So dividend investing, we believe, is also something that's very important. And then the last sort of point I'll make is around tax. So again, there's always a little guy on my left shoulder that reminds me about the tax side of things, given my background. But there's also various ways that you can save tax that are completely independent of your investment decisions. And so what are those? RSPs, tax-free savings account. There's now a first-time home buyer savings account for people who have never purchased a house. Those things are very important, and I've seen it with my clients over the better part of a decade. If you make those smart tax decisions, you will keep more money in your pocket. And there's too many to kind of go into, but I think a lot of people ignore. They think too much about what sort, am I going to buy Apple shares, or am I going to buy shares of RBC Royal Bank, and they forget that there's some decisions to be had before that. What type of account should I have? You know, who are my beneficiaries, as Jan pointed out, those types of things, and think about the tax planning piece. Okay, so point number 2, how does your strategy sort of tie into your estate plan? And I'm sure we're gonna hear from the team here about some of the things you should be thinking about with wills and powers of attorney and the like. Excuse me just a second here. I'm just gonna, again, the allergies are bugging me. Excuse me.
Could we just back up a minute?
Yeah, for sure.
What is your take on ETFs?
Oh, how much time do you have?
Oh,
So you know what's interesting, most people think that investment advisors or brokers, what we used to be called sort of 20 years ago, are against ETFs is the opposite. An ETF can be an amazing investment. It just depends on what you're doing and where you're buying it. And so let me use an example. I would not buy an ETF for the Canadian stock market, because if you did that, you would automatically be overweight Canadian banks, energy companies, insurance companies, and pipelines. I would buy an ETF for the S&P 500, the US stock market index, because it's very diversified across all sectors. And I do that in some cases with clients. So again, I think it just depends on what you're trying to do, and I think there is a space for ETFs, and then there's a lot of very good thematic ones. What's an example of that? You know, one of the hot button topics right now is artificial intelligence, right? There are thematic exchange traded funds that aim at a specific theme.
Yeah.
And that's a great way, if you don't know the individual companies you're wanting to buy, to get sort of broad exposure to a theme.
Okay.
Another area, just to finish the answer, that I would say I would stay away from ETFs is investing outside of North America. If you all of a sudden buy an ETF that's a Chinese ETF or even a European ETF, with an ETF you get the good and the bad, usually. And so it's this wrapper of all these things underneath it that you can't see. For the US stock market, I'd be okay with that. For something like the Chinese market, I'd be a little more leery. Okay.
And I haven't heard the word crypto at all.
I know, yeah, well, I don't believe in that. Yeah. I believe in it, it exists, I know it exists. My associate at work was a video gamer a long time ago. I'm now throwing Ryan under the bus because I know Irene knows him. And I think he had one Bitcoin or 2 Bitcoins from playing video games, 10 years ago or something like that, and he was just never able to actually unlock it or get at it. So I have trouble talking about, I have trouble recommending something that I still can't really
Well,
explain.
if you can't understand it or explain it, you stay away
Good
from it.
advice.
Nor
Yeah.
does Warren Buffett understand it, so.
Yeah, oh yeah, exactly. No, well, he's done all right for himself, so.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so just a good question on the ETF, thanks for that. On the estate planning side, a lot of people, especially people that have children, say that they want to leave a certain amount of money to their kids. Or it could be to a charity, or it could be to another organization, it could be a number of different things. So when you're building a portfolio and thinking about retirement strategies, you not only have to think about what type of money and cash flow do you need in retirement, but you also have to say, wait a minute, I want to leave a certain amount when I die. And as far as I know, I've not been able to figure out a calculation as to when people die, and people are living a lot longer on average. So that's something that has to be taken into account with your financial strategy, is how important is it for you to leave money to a relative or like I said, a charitable organization. My only 2 cents on that one, and why I thought it was important to bring up, is that from actual client experience with clients that I have, including clients who have downsized their properties and created a chunk of money that's generating a cash flow, I find they're almost more concerned about how much money is going to be left over when they're not around, and they lose sight of it's still going to be quite costly, and with inflation and expenses, what about worrying about you not running out of money? And that's my advice to them, is that I get you have goals in the future, but you kind of have to be selfish and think about yourself too. Because we have one client I can think of specifically who wants to leave a big chunk of money to his son, and I said, if you want to do that, that's fine, but I think you're gonna be really tightening the strings on your purse for your own life. And all of our clients, we always ask to meet with their lawyer so we understand their wishes and their will. We always want to know who the powers of attorney are. We always want to know if there's any other trusts or corporations or small businesses set up, so that we get the full picture of all the different moving pieces, and that's where we tie the investment strategy into the will and estate plan. Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
And I think that's a really, really important piece in that you really have to have your whole team working together. So whoever it is, they need to be working towards the same goals for you and need to know, it's kind of like the right hand needs to know what the left hand is doing, and everybody can work towards the same goal that you've set out for them.
Yeah. And not that it's in a sort of a will and estate planning scenario, but just to use that, that example of working together with service partners, I think like Irene and I are working on a number of mutual clients, more so with people who are trying to figure out how to get into the Toronto real estate market, or had been in and had been renting for a while and are now looking to buy again, given there has been a little bit of a correction in the real estate market, although not much. And so I think, like I said, a big thing that we do at RBC is make sure that we understand all the moving pieces and that we can reach out to people like Irene and her team when something like that comes up, because we are by no means experts on mortgages and the real estate market, as an example. Third one is what should be in your financial plan, and this kind of relates to your question. Every single client we work with, it's almost an opt-in scenario versus an opt-out. We almost insist that they go through a financial planning process with us, because you can imagine someone in my seat saying, what would you like to do, and how much money would you like to earn, and what do you want to do in retirement? And without doing a plan, I get some answers, and I kind of go, oh, okay, let's set up an investment strategy with this much risk. That could be correct, it might not be correct. So we, again, almost insist on having a financial plan done so we can really dig into exactly what retirement goals are. And to your question, one person in retirement might say they're going to spend $50,000 a year for the rest of their life, and another person might say, I'm going to travel every year on a National Geographic trip and spend $250,000 a year in retirement. Everybody is different. Every single person I work with, every single client we have on our client roster is completely different, and thus the financial plan is different for everybody. But if there's one thing to kind of highlight and double underline, I think the financial planning process, regardless of who helps you, regardless of what institution you work with, to me that is the most important piece and is really the hub of the whole picture that's going to tell you all the things that you need to think about. That's what will provide the lead to what will and estate planning do I need. Do I need insurance, life insurance, disability, long-term care insurance, to your point, as a way to hedge against rising healthcare costs? What is the most important to you and what do you want to achieve? And without that information, our team can't legitimately provide the next steps and then help you go down that roadmap without those pieces of information. So just again, going back to it, what should be in your financial plan? There should be a will and estate plan, and I'm sure there's still far too many people out there that don't have wills and do not have powers of attorney on the healthcare side or the financial decision side. What is your need for insurance? Not everybody needs insurance. I need insurance. I have a 5-year-old son and a mortgage. If I walk out this door and something happens to me, that's trouble. And my wife's not working right now. She's actually singing in a band, which she loves, but income is not the best. It's singing at the local pubs, but very very proud of her. Paper Triangle, I'll put a plug out there. Paper Triangle is her band, which she just played on Tuesday. But she's as happy as she's been. But she doesn't. My point is, she's not earning much of an income, and so if she wants to keep doing that, and I'm no longer around, I think she does keep wanting to do the music. Then insurance is a big need for me, but it may not be for you, right? Just depends. So again, will and estate plan, insurance plan. Tax. Again, go through your situation. Am I doing the right things in the various tax buckets? What does that mean? A lot of people invest in the exact same way in all of their various accounts, their TFSA, their RSP, their non-registered brokerage account. I'd argue that's wrong. You should be looking for certain types of income in various types of accounts. What do I mean by that? If you've got a GIC that pays 4.5% interest and your tax rate is 40%, you're not making 4.5% interest, you're making closer to, 2.5, I guess, but what I'm saying is that if you put that investment inside of a tax-free savings account or an RSP, you're at least keeping or deferring tax on that 4.5% you're making. So different types of accounts should be invested in different ways, in my opinion. And then also, there's a lot of ways to split. I mean, Canada does not give us a lot of ways to save tax. I'm sure most of us in this room can probably agree on that. But there are a few. You can invest inside of an insurance policy. That is still a rule that exists, and create tax deferral. It's called permanent insurance. You can still income split, so if one spouse is earning more than the other spouse, you can split pension income, you can split employment income between the two in certain scenarios, and you can definitely split investment income via something that's called a spousal loan. So again, in the vein of talking about the things that have an impact on the bottom line, yes, it's should I own shares of Apple or should I buy an ETF in your example, but there's other decisions that you have a lot more control of. We don't have control, nobody has control of the stock market. If I had that, I wouldn't be standing here. But we can control tax decisions and we can control planning decisions. Any question? Yeah?
I'm sorry, can you tell me what the name of the investment income, you said it was a something?
With your spouse, a spousal loan.
So spousal loan, okay.
Yeah, so it's basically you take a chunk of capital, you loan it to the higher income earning spouse, loans it to the lower income earning spouse, and the investment income gets reported on the lower income spouse's tax return, so to save a bit of money. That was a great planning point, or a better planning point, again, 16, 17 months ago when interest rates were really low. Because when you're loaning money to your spouse on paper, there's still an interest payment that has to be made. It was 1% 18 months ago, and now it's 4%. Right, so there's still a bit of an
Has
interest.
to be fair market value, right?
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
The last thing I would say is that, and again, regardless of institution you work at, regardless of what your plans are for the future, I will be the first one to say that the banks in Canada make it extremely confusing as to what the heck all of our job titles mean. You walk into a bank and you see about 10 different job titles and 15 different business cards for those 10 job titles, and there's all these designations, and so I think it would make sense just to, it's not really related to the topic today, but I think it's a really useful point. So I'll use RBC as an example. So if you have an investment portfolio and you need some help with your planning, you have three main options. You work with someone like myself who works at RBC Dominion Securities, and we would be sort of the full service brokerage, if you want to call it that. We touch on all the items that I just talked about, and that would be your most expensive option of those. But it's basically, you're getting all those services sort of in one package. You walk into and then I'm a portfolio manager, which means that I have discretion to make decisions on how much risk we should take based on what you've told me. So on your question about retirement, we would say, what are you looking to achieve? And then my team's job is to set up a strategy and figure out how we're going to get you to that point. If you walk into an RBC Royal Bank branch in your neighborhood, you'll meet basically one of three people, and this is route number 2. I have a financial planner, an investment retirement professional, which is called an IRP, or a banking advisor. And this, you can see.
I'm
where
already
this-
confused.
Exactly, right?
Well, yeah, it is.
It's very,
a
it's
problem.
awful. Yeah.
If you're lucky to get anybody to help you to begin with, because I walk to the
true.
banks
Yeah.
and there's nobody there.
Well,
To be quite honest.
I can't resist now. That's why I exist, though,
Yeah.
right? Because I don't go anywhere. I don't move on. I'm not in a branch. I actually have my own little practice, right? Same as Irene has her practice. So people that are looking for that dedicated service, they would go to the option 1, basically. There's nothing wrong with option 2. It's just like I said, there's work turnover, and just to finish the point, financial planners though at the bank level, whether it's RBC or not, are great. That's a great resource. They're going to be there regardless of whether you have any assets or not. They will help you on the planning side. To think about the things you need to think about. And the other thing that in Route 2, when you walk into that branch, the other thing you need to be prepared for, and this relates to your ETF question, when you go into a bank branch, the only products that they can sell you are the proprietary products of that bank. RBC mutual funds, RBC ETFs, TD mutual funds, TD ETFs. Whereas again, a full service brokerage like RBC Dominion Securities, we can decide if we want an ETF or a stock or a GIC or a bond. We'd have no sort of limitations there. And then the third one that you can go down is there are, outside of the banks, there are pay-per-use financial planners. They don't do any investing, you just pay them sort of an hourly rate to help with your planning, and they would not do any of the investment piece. So again, first option, a full service brokerage. Second option, the bank branch, really good, but proprietary products. They have to use the products from that specific bank. And then third option, a financial planner who gives you advice and works on a per hour basis like an accountant. Okay, any questions on that? I just thought I'd throw that in there,
Yeah,
because
no,
I think
that's good.
I get that question a ton.
What's the basic difference between RBC Dominion Securities and I'm with Direct Investing? What's the
Yeah.
difference?
While you're doing it yourself versus paying somebody to do it.
Oh, no, I'm doing it myself.
Well, no, that is the difference.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah, like basically you're paying $9 a trade or whatever it is.
Yep.
Versus paying me 1.5%
Okay.
of your assets to manage your strategy
I
and
didn't
all
realize
those planning. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and you know what, it's one of those things, everybody's got a good fit, right? So if that's working for you, good. Any other questions for me? Okay, well, thank you very much for the time. I'm glad we were able to chat today, and thank you for the questions.
All of the speakers' contact info you probably noticed is in the folders, so if you have some specific questions, if you get home and you think, oh, I forgot to ask, that's definitely available to you. And shameless plug for Jeff, he has been our personal wealth advisor,
Thank you very much.
wealth planner for, it's been 10 years?
Just under, I think, yeah.
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
known you for much longer, but yes.
Yeah, and we certainly did have to kiss a lot of frogs
Yeah.
before we found him. And you know, if that sort of total handing over your whole life to somebody and letting them plan everything works for you, then yeah, I would definitely recommend Jeff.
Appreciate
But
that.
you know, again, like with everything is so personal and everybody's different, and you just have to figure out what's right for you.
I will say this for you just for 10 seconds. Regardless though, we are here to help. So if you sit here and go, I have no idea what I want to do, just give me a call. Like, I'm happy to chat through and because our job is to say, we might not be the right people, but here is somebody that we think would fit well. We don't want you to kind of, sort of be stuck fish out of water trying to figure that out. I'm just gonna just in case you're interested, there's a lot going on in the actual marketplace, so I've just got our latest sort of weekly insight that I just printed this morning at the office, so I'll just leave maybe a copy with each of you in case you're interested.
Wonderful. Thank
Okay.
you, Jeff.
So Jeff, where is your office? You have an office?
I do, it's in Brookfield Place where the Hockey Hall of Fame is.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah, I tried to work.
So
from
you were
home
there
thing.
in person, so to
I'm
speak.
there every day because the whole working from home thing, I didn't fly.
Oh,
when I
it's
got
so
With a
home.
5-year-old.
I had- Granted, he was 2 at the time, so that was a
He
problem.
was.
Yeah, he didn't quite understand that I wasn't working that day.
All right, Vasco.
All right, can I just ask a favor? Can I sit instead of just
Of
standing there?
course,
It
of
seems more
course.
comfortable and
Yeah.
just
Thank you
eye
so
level
much.
with
Thank you.
everybody. Hi, good afternoon, guys.
There you go.
All right, thank you
All
very
right.
much. Thank
Vasco,
you.
I will leave you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sammy, thank you.
And there's
Thank
this.
you.
Oh, I'm fine, yeah.
All right,
All
I'll
right,
leave the floor to you.
okay, guys. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am a practicing lawyer. I have a varied practice, but I do a lot of wills and powers of attorney, so I'm just gonna talk to you a little bit about wills and powers of attorney. As Jeff mentioned, it is surprising how many people don't have wills. Even a lot of my lawyer friends don't have wills, and it is really important to have a will. I'm still surprised how many people think, well, if I don't have a will when I die, what happens to all my assets? And a lot of people still think that they all go to the government, or somehow the government gets your assets if you don't have a will. And definitely not true. It's a common misconception, but it's definitely not true. But what happens is if you don't have a will, the law sets out where your property goes. So you don't really have a choice. Now, it may be in accordance with what you want, but it may not be. And so if you pass without a will, the law says that everything you own is first goes to your spouse. So you have no choice, everything will go to your spouse.
Yay!
So maybe you don't want him to have a will. So, also, if you don't have a spouse, everything would go to your children, and it will go equally to all of your children. So if you would prefer to have one child or have more than another, then unfortunately you're gonna need a will for that, otherwise by law it would go equally to all your children. And then if you have no children, it goes back to your parents, and so there is a line of succession that your assets are divided if you die without a will. So having a will is a great thing to have, because then you can control where all your assets go, how much goes to any individual, and you also get to control who takes care of your estate and who would divide it up and make sure that everybody gets what you want them to get. If you have minor children, and probably doesn't apply to anybody at this table here, but if you have minor children, then you get to determine or have a say in who their guardian will be once you pass, who will take care of your kids once you pass. And also you can appoint people to take care of the funds for the children. So if you leave money aside for a young child, and this would be both for your own children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, you can decide, okay, I'm gonna leave this person in charge of the money for my grandson or my granddaughter, and you make that decision as to who you feel is best to take care of the finances. Now when you go to prepare a will, there's obviously two choices now. You can go the old route and go hire a lawyer to do it, and as a lawyer I'll highly recommend that, but also because it can get a little complicated, and when you prepare a will you want to think 2 or 3 steps down the road. So example, you want to, obviously if you have children, take care of your children, but sometimes as luck would have it, fortune have it, sometimes your children predecease you. So you want to anticipate that all of these eventualities, and then you go, for example, if you have 3 children, you want to leave it to all 3 children. If one predeceases you, what happens to their share? If they have children, do you want it to go to their children, or do you want it to go to your remaining children? So these are the kind of things that a lawyer would bring out, and you want to make sure you cover all eventualities, because if there is gaps in a will, and for example, let's say you leave everything to all your children, and one of your children predeceases you, if there's a gap or there's uncertainty, then you're going to have to end up going to court, and a judge will have to decide what happens with that. There's no automatic laws, so it can get a little complicated and expensive, quite frankly, if you're going to go to court. So you want to avoid that. So you now, other than having a lawyer prepare a will, a lot of people now, because of the internet and because there's access to all this information online, and now there's even draft wills online that you can get, a lot of people now will forego a lawyer and do it online. Now, I don't recommend that unless you have a very, very basic estate and very simple instructions as to how you want your estate to go, because there's a lot of technical issues. It's not that easy as it sounds. 2-page document, I just write down who I give it to and it's all done. It's not that simple, and if you create, if there's any technical problems with it, it may be an invalid will, and so you're doing it all for nothing. And in the long run, if there's a mistake, you could be going to court and costing you thousands and thousands of dollars, which is really avoidable if you hire a lawyer.
Who determines whether a will is invalid?
Well, first of all, upon your passing, then it would be, okay, now your family's going to get together, okay, these are the assets and this is what the will said. Now, maybe there's no clarity in the will, and so somebody's going to say, well, I don't agree with that. Or once there's a dispute between family members in terms of how the will is interpreted, then you would have to go to a judge, and then a judge would decide. And what happens is when a person passes, before you can distribute the assets, you have to go to probate the will with a court. So you file the will with a court, which is the first step. And then at that point, anybody can object, and the judge will determine, yes, it's clear on its face what's supposed to happen, and they will validate the will and probate the will. Okay? So if there's any dispute, if any family members are arguing that how to interpret the will, it has to go to a judge. A judge is the only person who can decide what the actual intent of the will is.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course, sorry about that, yes.
No worries. So my mom used the Ministry of the Attorney General of Ontario's forms to fill out her POAs.
Yeah,
When it came time to sell the house, not valid.
yeah.
Which blows my mind, because this is the ministry's forms that she used, filled out correctly. How much chance is there of running into that kind of issue with an online will?
The same odds, same chances.
So something big, like selling a home, the buyer might not be happy with an online will?
Well, no, it wouldn't necessarily come to hang, in the context of selling a home, but transferring the home to a family member may be a problem if it's not done properly in the will.
Okay.
And there's also more technical issues. Power of attorney, you just need 2 witnesses. With a will, you've got to cover all of these steps. There's got to be a proper executor. There's got to be a proper line of inheritance or.
So it's even more complicated.
It's even more complicated than powers of attorney, right?
That answers that.
You know, a lot of people do use them effectively online, but it's hard to navigate, and you know, for a lawyer to prepare an average will, you're looking at, it used to be $300, $400. Now you're looking at about $700, $800, maybe $900 for an average will now, because it does take a couple hours of a lawyer's time. Before, they used to be very straightforward. Who are your kids? And put in your kids, and it's done. But now you have different assets. You have some people have assets not only in Ontario, you have assets in different jurisdictions. So it gets a little bit more complicated. So legal fees are a little bit more expensive, but still, you know, $700, $800, $900 for a will saves you a lot of possible headaches and certainly a lot of money if something's wrong. And so it's, I think, money well worth spent, and gives you good advice. Not only preparing the document, but a lawyer will also advise you on what things to consider and what not to consider, and things that you may not think about are important. They will prompt you to think about these issues.
This came up with Jan because I originally had a very simple provincial power of attorney form that I was actually given legal advice on. One of the lawyers that I was talking to said that's going to be sufficient, and it was for my father because he was getting quite ill, actually for both of my parents. And we started finding out that it was not sufficient, and we were able to get a validation through a different lawyer with extra witnesses, so the documents we had were going to be valid. So when Jan called us in to help with the sale of his mom's house, and mom was in a residence and she was still with us, but he had the same kind of power of attorney form that I did, and I knew that it was not valid. And we ran into issues because there were there was health issues that prevented her from actually signing a formal, proper power of attorney. So we ran into quite a situation.
I take small exception there because I stand on principle. That power of attorney was valid. It was issued on forms from the Ontario Ministry of the Attorney General, and brokers or possible purchasers chose not to accept it. There's a subtle difference.
Well, there is a subtle difference because the purchaser can say, we don't agree with it, and then you're stuck with their
Because it wasn't
position.
registered and done by a legal person and notarized, then people can say, oh, we don't want to go through it. You know,
Yeah.
my options then would be, I could have sued them for not going through with the sale of the house, but then that turns into a real, you know.
Yeah.
That's
I don't know
exactly
that
right, that's
Right.
right, that's
But-
right.
but
But
it
all
was
of that could have
valid.
been avoided.
It just wasn't accepted,
I had
and
one
that's what
too.
bugs me.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
well-
so you got a question, yeah?
I do. So, for instance, if you have a will that you have written when you're 50 years old,
Yes?
and, you know, things change through time, and you're 75 now, and you're in hospital, and you're not well,
Yes?
things have changed within your family dynamic. And perhaps you don't want to leave things to certain children or certain family members that originally you had put in your will when you were 50 years old. How can you, is it called a holographic will or something like that? Is there something that you can put into place that now usurps that?
Well, what you have to do is you have to do a whole new will.
Oh, okay, so it's
Alright,
not.
so now you can
okay.
do minor changes by what it's called a codicil, which is
Codicil, yeah.
if you
Okay.
could just, if you wanna change, I wanna leave my cousin Jerry instead of 50,000, I wanna leave them 100,000.
Thank you.
Okay.
Then it's very simple by document. But if you're gonna change in terms of the shares of, you want, maybe cut out one son or give more to one daughter than originally anticipated,
Right.
then you need a whole new will.
Okay.
And the problem by waiting too long is if you're at that point, what was your example, 75
If
now
you're
at
in
that
the
point?
hospital.
Yeah, that's, if you don't have the mental capacity,
Right.
then you may legally not be able to change that will. Then you're stuck with the original will. So it's always good, I mean, it's easy to do a will and put it away and never worry about it until until you're passing and everybody else will worry about it. But you always have to keep in mind that that will is there, and everything that changes, any dynamic, for example, a loss of a child, sometimes a divorce, a marriage, those sort of life events, you're gonna wanna go back and think, okay, what's in my will? Do I need to update it? And you have to be always current in your updating. If you leave it too, I have a lot of people who have wills from the 60s or 70s and they come to me and their daughter brings them to my office and they're 92 and I try to talk to them, but they can't give me instructions
Right.
because they're not capable any longer. So legally, they are stuck with the old will.
Okay.
All right, so that is a problem. So it's very important that any life events, always think back to your will and what effect they have on what's in your will. Very important. That's a good question. Right? So whether you prepare a will yourself or whether you hire a lawyer to prepare a will, there's things you want to consider. The first thing you want to consider is what's called an executor. The executor is the person who's going to take care of everything. So you're going to have somebody, a family member, a good friend, who's going to step in, take your estate, and divide it up amongst the beneficiaries or the people that you want to give everything to. So that's a very important role, and so you want to have somebody that you trust, that will carry out your wishes, and is likely to survive you. So you don't want somebody who's older than you, you want somebody who's younger than you. But even if they're younger than you, there's always possibility, there's always fortuitous events and anything can happen. So what we also recommend is that you have an alternate executor. So if that happens to your executor, then the alternate can step in. Right? So you want to consider that. It's very important factors to consider.
Can your executor also be a major benefactor?
No, your executor, it cannot be one. Oh, it can be a beneficiary. Yes, it can be. Yes, you can. I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay.
So a lot of times, if I leave everything to my wife, I make her my executor and my beneficiary. Yes, you can do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I can ask you a quick question?
Sure.
This came when we did our wills.
Yes.
When you choose an executor,
Yeah.
the way you've described, is it customary, if they're not a beneficiary, to leave them a little something?
Okay, some people specifically leave them remuneration in the will. Other times, they are entitled to remuneration by the law. So they will usually get some remuneration. Now, if they're a brother acting for all the siblings, they usually don't bother. But if you have a friend and it's a lot of work and there's a big estate or it's a complicated estate or there's a lot of complicated issues, then they're entitled to compensation. The rule of thumb is it's about 5% of the value of the estate. So if your estate is worth $2 million, it's about $100,000. Okay, but then it varies from there. If it's simply $2 million is one house, you sell it and you develop the money, then the 100,000 is too much. But the rule of thumb is about 5%. And yes, executors are entitled to compensation for their time. So once you've decided on an executor who's going to take care of everything, then you're going to want to decide how to divide up all your estate. Sometimes it's very straightforward. If you have children, you want to leave everything to equally to all of your children. Now, you can do many things with your estate. You can, first of all, leave aside some money for charities, corporations, other individuals. So you can take a few lump sums and give them to specific individuals or corporations. You can deal with specific tangible property, like if you have artwork or anything of sentimental value, any heirlooms, anything, for example, so I know some people have a real, antique cars and stuff like that. You want to leave a specific individual, then you're going to decide, okay, this property is going to go to this individual. Then whatever's left in your estate after you divided up those little chunks and little assets, then you're going to decide where is all that going to go. And then that's obviously your decision. You're free to decide how you want to and who you want to leave that to. There is one obligation if you are married, not common law, but if you are married, you do have to provide for your spouse in your will. If you do not provide for your spouse, then they can contest the will And what will happen is the law treats it as a separation, and at that point, she would or he would, the spouse who's alive, would be entitled to 50% of the estate. So you do have to provide for a spouse and any dependent children, which is very, very rare.
Can I just throw something in there just really
Sure,
quickly?
sure.
That you had, I came from a very large family.
Yeah.
I was the youngest of 8 kids. I
Yeah,
would highly recommend that if you're leaving power of attorney to people before such time, that,
Mhm.
you know, that you also make sure that I have 6 older brothers, and I was the power of attorney for my mother's health, because she knew I would take care of her. My brothers, while they love my mother, would have been happy to have her wherever she landed. So I think that being aware of that in terms of making sure that for health and for your, legal
Finances.
things
yeah,
can be different people.
that's right. Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about powers of attorney.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
I
that's
wasn't
right.
that can be.
No problem.
Sorry,
No, that's a good
thanks.
point. And those are the some kinds of considers when you want to consider an executor. If you have 3 children, you want to appoint the one, not because they're the oldest, but because the one who's more likely to be more attentive to these issues and more interested and more fair. Right? And if you have, let's say, 3 children and 2 of them are always constantly fighting or none of them get along, then you might want to appoint 2 of them as executor. You can have 2 executors and they would act jointly. That way there would be a check on each other and make things go a little bit smoother as opposed to fighting the one person who's going to make all the decisions. So you have a lot of flexibility, and that's why it's good to talk to a lawyer or do some research online to explain all of these options to you, because there is a lot of different possible variations in all of this stuff. 2 last things you might want to consider for a will. One is funeral arrangements. A lot of people will put in their funeral arrangements, their desires with respect to funerals and burials in their will. That used to be a little bit more common, not so much anymore, because what happens is by the time the family finds the lawyer, finds where the will is, the person is already buried or the funeral arrangements are over. So, you want to, if it comes to funeral arrangements, you want to tell your family what you want. You can put it in your will, but in addition, make sure you tell your family what you want, because sometimes it may take days or weeks or months to find the actual will after the person has passed.
I have heard people say that it's really much wiser if you can do it, to pre-plan.
Well, now people do, and that's the way to go, really it
Yeah.
is, because you can do whatever you want, how you want it, and you take the pressure off everybody else
Yeah.
having to worry about that at that time. That's right, so that's always the best way to do it. Yeah.
Question there, do you still put a quick clause in your will that says whoever paid for those funeral arrangements gets reimbursed out of your estate?
Well, yeah, you can put that in there, but it's generally taken for granted that the person, the funeral is a debt of the deceased, so that if anybody covers that debt, they're entitled to reimbursement for that money, right?
Okay.
And then the last thing you want to consider in your will is, especially if you have minor children, is who you want as a guardian for your children. So if you're, unfortunately sometimes people pass at young ages and your children are only 7 or 8 or 10 years old, you want to have a say who will be their guardian. Now what happens in that regard is, so you say, let's say I want my brother, their Uncle Joe, to be their guardian if I pass away. Well, I put that in my will, but that, upon your passing for 90 days, Uncle Joe steps in as your guardian. But eventually Uncle Joe has to go to the court and get an order from the court sanctioning him as the long-term guardian of the children. And in that process, what happens is other family members can step in and say, well, no, we don't think Uncle Joe is the best bet. He's become an alcoholic since the will was done, or for whatever reason, we object to Joe. Well, then the judge would look at everything and decide what's best for the kids. Ultimately, it's what's best for the kids, not what I say in my will. But what I say in my will be weigh heavily in the judge's consideration. So you have a say in that, but at the end of the day, you have to keep in mind that it's not a final decision when what you put in your will with your children, with respect to guardians for your children.
If you want to, when you pass, if you want to, organs if you want to donate your organs,
Yeah.
Does that have to be in the will?
No, that does not have to be in a will, and again, I recommend that it not be in a will. You can put it in a will, but your primary source for that should be registering. Now, there's a registration system with the government, and you get a card, it's all done online, because the moment of your passing, it could be in a street in the middle of an accident or something. The first thing the first responders will do is check for that, and then they will harvest or do whatever they need to do to preserve your organs. So they need to know that instantaneously. That they expire within hours, so that's very important that nobody's going to be going around looking for a will for that.
Okay,
So you can include it in your will because it will tell your family, this is what I believe and this is what I want. Because a lot of people have a conceptual problem with people leaving organs, right? And especially people more who tend with some religious issues. So you want to make it clear to your family, this is what I want, it means a lot to me, and you can put it in your will. But you make sure you follow up and register yourself with the government bank or the whatever the registry system is for that.
Okay, similarly, I guess it would apply to if you want to leave your body to science.
Yes, that would apply to that as well. That's right. That's right. And I think in that regard, you can do a little bit of research.
That was priceless, Nita.
Oh, my dear.
This is why you
This
like
is what
both
it is
spouses to
coming
come to seminars, right?
I don't want to start any fights at home now. All right. So that's the will. And when you do a will, you're basically choosing who gets what. Now, in addition to a will, you can also
Can
have.
I one more on will?
Yeah, sure. No, I'm not done with will, but go ahead and ask.
Gifts prior to death that are duly noted and kept out there for outside of the estate.
Right.
Still legal in Ontario?
Yes, that's right.
And how official does the documentation have to be?
Well, it's just a matter of proof. Sometimes, you know, if the family's here at a Christmas dinner and I say, okay, my son Bob, I'm going to give you my car, it's a car as a gift, and everybody's witnesses to that, that's enough evidence. It's always best to put it in writing and say, I gift this to this person, and it just has to be a handwritten note, it doesn't have to be notarized, it doesn't have to be a yeah, that's right, as long as there's evidence, and the judge is satisfied that it's sufficient evidence to set out that it's a gift. That's the key, is to prove that it's a gift and not a loan.
Thank you.
Okay? And you can do that at any time in your life. Now, in addition to wills, which govern where your assets and where your estate goes, there's also what people is when you name a beneficiary. And when you name a beneficiary, you're going to go to the financial instrument, whatever it is. So if you have a life insurance policy, if you have an RSP, a TFSA, some investment accounts, and instead of going through your estate, you say, well, that life insurance policy, I want that to go to my grandson. I'm setting that aside because my grandson's going to go to university and I want to make sure that he has enough money for university. So anything else I'm going to divide in my will, but that one asset, I want it to go to my grandson. Well, all you have to do is just go to the bank or wherever, or the life insurance company and say, can I designate my grandson as a beneficiary to this asset? And you could do that with many, many financial instruments. So you might want to talk to your bank or your financial advisor. And I always recommend that. And what happens with those assets is they no longer go under your will. So if you if you say in your will, I want everything to go to my daughter, well, if this life insurance policy is designated to your grandson, that does not go through the will. It goes directly to your grandson.
So it's essentially outside the will.
It's just outside your estate, outside the will. Exactly right. Right?
That's good to know.
Yeah, and so you can do that and keep certain assets for certain individuals that way. There's one advantage to that, other than controlling how it goes without going through your estate, is that anything that goes outside of your estate, outside of your will, you don't pay probate fees on.
Yeah.
When you probate a will, you have to pay government fees, taxes. They're not expensive, they're $15 for every $1,000 of assets, so it comes out to 1.5% is the probate fees. But by doing that, the grandson would get that money tax-free. Yes?
We often talk in terms of having asset.
Yeah.
What if you have debt? Is there such a thing is there an insurance debt of some, like an insurance on debt that you may have, or
I don't
is there
think there's
something that's,
insurance to cover all debts, sorry.
yeah,
Right, there's no, but then, I mean, there's certain things like there's mortgage insurance.
right,
Right?
just, yeah,
And there's,
if you own
there's
a
other
cottage not
assets,
paid
yeah,
for.
that's right, car insurance and stuff
Like
like
if you
that.
took out what do they call it, it's not a loan, but it's a credit,
Line of credit?
line of credit or
Yeah.
something like that. Is there something, like, is there an insurance, or is there something that says the people who are the executors are
Well-
not, or the people, they're not responsible? Is there something that,
Well, the law says that the debt is only belongs to the individual.
okay,
All right, so if I take out a debt in my name,
Mhm.
and my wife is separate and she doesn't have nothing to do with this line of credit, say I need a line of credit for my business, I wanna open up a coffee shop and I'm getting a bank of $100,000.
right,
First of all, I can get a life insurance on that line of credit, so that if I pass away, the life insurance company will step in and pay off the line of credit.
okay,
But if I don't have life insurance, when I pass away, that debt is mine.
right,
So that before I could, and let's say, you know, I own a house. Before I can get that house and distribute it to all my beneficiaries, I have to pay the bank the debt first. The debts come before the beneficiaries,
gotcha,
right? So, but if my wife owns a house, when she passes, she can do whatever she wants with the house. That debt is not hers. So if, when I pass away, my wife doesn't assume that debt. She is not responsible for that debt, okay? But when my debts, I have to be paid first before my beneficiaries can get any of my estate.
gotcha,
Unless you have insurance and stuff like that,
okay.
okay? And that's very common.
So that's the girl saying is you own your debt.
That's exactly right, that's right.
Vasco, if we could sort of just move along a
Sure,
little bit,
sure.
just to
Yeah,
make sure
sorry,
we've got
okay,
enough
okay. Yeah,
time for Teresa.
okay, and then, let's see,
Property.
yeah, so when anything that you name a beneficiary on, keep in mind that it's not in your will. So if you're accounting for in your will all your assets, you gotta make sure what's in your will goes to those beneficiaries, and what's outside your will that are beneficiaries have to be accounted for as well. And then lastly,
What was the last thing you said? What is not in your will, you still have to mention.
no, what's
who.
beneficiary, the
You
designated
have to
beneficiary.
designate a beneficiary
No,
for what
no.
is now outside your will as
That is now
well.
outside your will, so when you prepare your will, keep in mind what's outside your will.
Okay.
Alright, because you have stuff outside your will and you have stuff through your estate. Now, a lot of people want to leave specific assets like real estate to people in their will, or bank accounts. We don't recommend that because, first of all, you want, sometimes these will could be, you know, valid for 20, 30 years before you pass. And things will change with your assets. So if you're gonna, let's say I wanna leave my house to my children, you gotta be careful because down the road, you may need to sell your house and you may need it for your medical expenses or for your care and for your living. So if you just say in my will, I'm gonna leave this house to this person, that may be a problem if by the time you pass, you've sold your house. So keep that in mind, and we always recommend that if you put in leaving my house, you also say, if I don't own my house, this is what I want that person to get. Just cover that off. Okay, and then the last thing I want to mention, as I mentioned, I want to talk about powers of attorney. Will applies when you pass away, and what happens to your assets. If, however, you're still alive but incapacitated, whether physically or mentally incapacitated, then you need a power of attorney. And just like a will, you have to sign it when you're competent. Once you're incompetent, it's too late. So you have one power of attorney for property, which is your finances. So you designate somebody to take care of all your finances when you cannot. And for personal care, which is your medical decisions. So finances, obviously, again, you want to trust somebody. You want somebody you can trust because they're going to have access to all your money. And then for medical decisions, even more so, you want somebody you trust. And also, you want to sit down with that person and let them know what kind of care you want should something happen and should they need to step in. All right?
Good.
Any other questions other than the ones along the way there?
I'm gonna throw something to do with healthcare that I found pretty interesting. And it's just a suggestion I've been doing down to Florida twice to help my dad. And we found this organization in Florida called 5 Steps, and it's not here in Canada, and it's from palliative doctors who realized that living wills were really kind of cold, crude, and harsh, the way they are written by lawyers. If you write to them in Florida and get a copy of this booklet they send, it's compassionate, it's thoughtful. It goes way above and beyond planning what you want in your living will than anything I've ever seen in a standard living will. It's called 5 Steps out of Florida.
I'm gonna look that up.
It was amazing.
They're great. Thanks very much for your time, folks.
Thanks,
Really nice to
Vasco.
talk to you.
I learned some stuff.
great.
That's why I love these seminars, because as much as, you know, we're in the business and have been doing it for decades, you always learn something new. Yeah, thank you for that, Vasco.
No, my pleasure, my pleasure.
So last but not least, we have Teresa Kozowski, who will help you get your mind wrapped around all your stuff.
How are you?
Good, good. So I'm Teresa Kozowski. I have been
toiling around with estates and doing cleanups and clearouts and auctions and all of these things for many, many years. And I will tell you that I came across this business sort of organically because I am the 8th child, as I mentioned before. I am the 8th of 2 children. So my parents were both the eldest of 8 and I'm the youngest of 8.
Wow.
And so my dad served in the Canadian Navy. He was a signalman on several of the warships. And my mother was a bomb girl during World War II. So I have several siblings who were born during the late 40s right up until like myself in the 60s. So I come across a lot of generations. Now, because I was the 8th and I was the last one at home, I spent a lot of time with my parents wandering around to antique stores, shopping with them, looking at all the fun stuff. Because by the time I came around, my parents had a little bit more disposable income, so they got to have some fun with the stuff. How many of you at this table have too much stuff? Okay, how many of you have too many tools? How many of you have too many? I'm looking at the guys. So,
Never too many tools.
right, okay.
We have to draw the line.
Exactly. So everybody always says they have too much stuff. And that just comes from, you know, years of...
Well, it's years and years.
Years, right? And if you've been in your same home for many years, or even if you've made the move, you always say, oh, I'll take that with me because so-and-so might want that someday.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to keep these dishes because my daughter or my son might need them when they get married. Or, you know, I have to keep grandma's dining room table because, well, it was grandma's dining room table. And 30 years from now, it's going to be worth a lot more money. It's going to be worth a ton of money. So this old brown table, this old brown wood, that's what it is. It's old brown wood. And it's just because it was grandma's does not mean it's worth a lot of money. Now, having said that, if this old brown wood happened to be sitting in a castle somewhere in Europe at some point in time and you can prove the provenance of it,
Yes,
well then that
a lot
makes
of
a
money.
difference. It could be worth a lot of money. So having your stuff and knowing what your things are worth is something that you really should look into ahead of time. And it's something that you should say, okay, I do want to leave this, and we talked about wills and things. It's important that you say, I want Johnny to have the silverware. Not just point to the china cabinet and say, that's yours. Well, does that mean he gets the china cabinet, or does that mean he gets all the crystal in it with the silverware and everything else? Because there may be several other siblings who over time you may have said, oh, you can have that silverware. And then what do? You create havoc when you're gone. And this is something that I see in my business all the time. I cannot tell you the amount of grief that I have watched and witnessed of people fighting over Royal Daltons or spoon collections, which I think is absurd. But this is a reality of life.
Yeah.
And it's not even, and most of the time it's not even because of the item, it's because of the emotion attached to it. And that is because it belonged to mom and dad, or it belonged to Nana or Papa, and I need to have that because I had a very important relationship with them. If we aren't responsible in making sure that those are clear in our wills, if you're going to do that and you're going to pass on those types of items, you know, this could create some problems. I mean, I come from a very large family and I saw it firsthand. In a very different way. It was almost silly the way that we did it when my dad passed 20 years before my mother did. And when we were going through my mom's stuff, she had moved in with me before she passed, and we're going through the house, and we kind of did the, no, you can take that, no, you take it, no, I don't want it, you take it. So it was one of those things as opposed to the I want it, it was no, you take it. Because we were all at an age where we had all of our own stuff and our spouse's parents' stuff. So you start to acquire all of these things. And then it's, what do I do with it? Where is it gonna go? So if any of you are in the process of thinking about, you know, what that's gonna look like, I would also highly recommend, in this process, if you're going to leave instructions for people, one of the things, you're investing time. And right now you might be investing time with a realtor, for instance, or you're, you know, the word just escaped me completely.
I help with money.
That's you. So, and your lawyer, and your financial advisor, and your lawyer. Please put that down
Yeah.
Please put down anybody who you have an established relationship with that you want your children to follow. Because what happens is in a situation like mine, where my mother had been dealing with a realtor for 30 years. 30 years she had a relationship with this gentleman who visited her regularly, who came by to have tea with her, who showed up at my father's funeral. He was always there. My two older siblings, who were in charge of the financial part of the executorship, decided they wanted to hire a friend. So this poor guy who put in all this time, 30 years, the rest of us really wanted him, was not our decision.
Yeah.
And I thought it was terribly unfair that that happened for this man who put in his time with my mom, and that's who she wanted. But unfortunately, she didn't write it down. So I would highly recommend you do that. With the stuff that's in your house as well, when it comes to your executors, if you have more than one executor and you want somebody who you know will do justice to what you want distributed properly, please put that also in your will, because I see that a lot as well in terms of, no, mom said I could have it, no, dad said you could have it. There's a lot of stuff that does happen within families. If you have an enormous amount of things in your home and it is stopping you from making a move, because that thought, that daunting thought
It's a daunting, it is daunting.
that I don't want to start packing this stuff up and I don't know what to do with it, that's why companies like mine exist. Because we can come in and we say, okay, this is where you start. We actually set out a plan for you in advance as to, look, if you haven't used this in 10 years, you're not going to use it. Pass it on, let's get rid of it. Let's sell it, let's do what we can. Let's donate it to a family that has just come here from the Ukraine. There are so many options that we can offer that can help you get to that stage where it's just like, okay, we're ready to go. Because while right now you may be considering a move, and it's, oh, that's 10 years away, sometimes we make plans and God laughs. And we say, you know, now I need to go tomorrow.
And time flies.
And it does fly. And you know, I think being prepared with your stuff is hugely important, because there are people, as much as they say I don't care, everybody doesn't care until they care. And that's because when they have to actually see it leave, that's when the emotions come out. And that's what we have been dealing with and we work with every single day. So we have clients that, you know, Grandma's tea set is more than just Grandma's tea set. That is years of memories that, you know, that they sat down at a table and had tea with Grandma. So the fact of like, my kids don't want this, and you know, I don't want to give this up, and I think that it's worth $10,000 because I had tea with my grandma, does not really mean that it's worth $10,000. It's probably worth maybe $50. But if your children don't want it, that's devastating. So that's the first part, the fact that it's going to leave your presence. That's also a second part to this. But what if I tell you that that tea set is getting moved on to somebody who's absolutely going to love that, and who's going to enjoy it, and who actually wants it? Or it's going to go to a family that just came here from the Ukraine because their house got blown up. There's got to be something in that will make you realize, okay, it's going to have its next best life. And if you can look at it from that perspective, that okay, it's going to have its next best life, that's amazing. The idea that you can also make some money on this stuff to, you know, fund your little pad of cash that you can have in your bank, that you can invest, and that you can, you can like end up here. It's 55 to get in here. I qualified as with here now. This is amazing. So
Just saying.
Just saying. It's almost cheaper than my rent. So I'm just, you know, I look around and I think to myself, like, with all this stuff that we have and all of the items that you have, tell me something that's in your home that you think, my kids want this. My kids want this, or one of my relatives may want this. What's in your home right now that you think they absolutely want?
We don't actually have kids.
Okay, so a relative.
My sister-in-law would probably want our china set.
Okay,
Which is
probably
exquisite.
want it. Okay, it's exquisite. So, do you know that for a fact?
No, we haven't discussed it.
Right. So there you go. Right. So because when my sister comes over to my house, or when I go, particularly when I go to my sister's house and we're having dinner, and I say, "Oh, Colleen, these are beautiful. These are our grandmother's dishes. They are beautiful. I do not want them. I have no desire to have another set of dishes. I am in no way, but my sister assumed, because I used to say,
Yeah.
these are beautiful, that she
wanted
actually left them in her will to me.
Oh.
And I'm like, take it out, I don't want them, please, I have enough stuff, I don't want them.
Contest them.
So you, yeah, exactly, I'm gonna contest that. So I think you really need to ask the questions, because I always get this, you know, when I'm going to people's houses, particularly, and Irene can attest to this, everybody has these ginormous china cabinets, dining room tables, and everybody thinks that they're worth a lot of money because they're very old, they're big, wood, they're heavy, they're solid, it's made really well, they must be worth a fortune. I cannot tell you the last time I was able to easily sell
No,
a
it's
dining
true.
room set. And when I do sell them, I'm getting $200 for the table.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm getting $50 for the base of the china cabinet, and they throw out the top.
You know what?
It's what happens. Now, unless it's teak or rosewood, other than that, it holds no value. And teak and rosewood right now are in a fad, in a phase right now where everybody wants it again. Maybe in a few years,
In 20 years ago, they weren't.
right, but maybe in a few years it'll be black lacquer again. All the
Yeah.
stuff that we had in the 80s will all come back again. Who knows, right? So it's just one of those things, like it does go in phases. It's just how things work. Royal Daltons used to be $750 to $1,500. I can't give them away for $30 now. Plates, you know, from those wall plates with the animals on them and all that stuff.
Yeah.
No, but you can go to Value Village and find them for $2.
Yeah.
You can find crystal in Value Village for $1. You can find so many things because, unfortunately during COVID, a whole group of seniors passed away in our community. Thousands. And all of their stuff went into the market.
But even before COVID, my friend told me she went to a store out in the countryside and she was looking for antiques and stuff like that. And a big sign at the front entrance said, "We do not accept china, we don't want crystal, we don't want any of this." Right up
So-
front, she couldn't.
So places
That was
like the
it.
Furniture Bank used to be a
Yeah.
great source for you to
Yeah.
be able to
Yeah.
send things to. Have so much stuff they can't even take it anymore, and they charge you a lot of money now to take it away. What's the other one? The Restore. The
Yeah.
Restore they've all got signs up saying, "No, thank you. We're packed. Make an appointment, we'll get to you in a few months." The problem is that everybody leaves this until the last minute. Everybody waits until a month before. And they often leave this at the responsibility of the realtor to come in. We gotta get this on the market, we gotta do this within the next 2 months, we gotta get this place sold, cleaned up, moved out. That's a lot to put on a realtor. Now, I'm not saying that they can't do it, they do it, but they've gotta bring this team in and they want it, you know, they're trying to work with professionals to get the job done as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, what happens, and I work with a lot of different realtors, is that they get a lot of grief from people on occasion from the fact of like, oh, I thought that was gonna be worth more. I thought we were gonna get more out of it. But when you're leaving people in a position to not have the time to actually facilitate this, it's a very difficult task for them to do. So I would say, if you're even thinking of 5 to 10 years of making a move, now is when you have to start downsizing. Now is when you have to start putting those wheels in motion. Now is when you have to start, give it to your kids now. If you want to have them have that Tiffany lamp, or family members, or nieces, nephews, whoever it's gonna be, please pass it on now if you're not using it specifically. I'm not saying to hand over your dining room table where you're still eating, but what I'm saying is those items that you are not using, clear out the closets, go into the basement.
Yep.
Those chairs that you're gonna fix one of these days, get rid of it because you're not. And I wanna say thank you so much for being here today, and I wanna thank Irene for having me. I am available to come to homes to do an evaluation. It's free charge, just if you ever wanna have a plan, I'm happy to do so.
So do you get actually involved in, and let's say you take a whole inventory
I do.
of the situation?
I do.
And then you actually plan if we wanna get rid of it, to sell and everything?
Yeah, we go through a whole plan together.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah, so my card is in there, and any advice that you would like, I'm happy to do it. And if I can't do it, I know somebody that can. Oftentimes, there's things that are out of my scope, that I think that the art is too valuable, or something might be too valuable. I have people that I can send it off to, where you will get the full value of what it's actually worth. And I'm happy to do that.
It's good to know these things because planning is the word.
It is the key.
Yes.
It is the key. So thank you for being here
Thank
today, I
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Very good. Well, everybody, thank you so much for coming. I know that none of you are moving from your homes anytime soon. Well, I don't know, maybe you. But are there any specific questions about the real estate market that you have now, anything burning that I can answer while we're here?
I just have one question in terms, do you only deal with Toronto?
Our team deals with Toronto, but Keller Williams is international. We are in 58 regions across the world with 194,000
And what about like
realtors.
Ontario, Northern
Absolutely,
Ontario? any part?
Ontario, Canada, North America, the world, anywhere you are looking. Flavia and Lawrence had already bought a property in Italy, so we weren't able to help
Can
them
we
then.
visit? Thank you.
But Utah, anywhere you need anyone, if you're not within our Keller Williams network, we are very, very well connected. Like Teresa said, any real estate questions that you have, start with me, and if it's not something that we
Yeah.
cover, we'll connect you with the best local expert. For example, we can sell in Northern Ontario, but that doesn't mean shit.
Oh,
Because
you
we
go to
don't-
the better ones, like the ones.
The local people who know the market,
Yes.
who know the neighborhoods, who know what's good, what's bad, what's overpriced, what's a good deal. Information you can only get from a local expert.
Very good, thank you.
Thanks, Irene.
Thanks for.
Good.
Very,
Thanks
very
for
good.
being here. It's nice